Hey, everybody. Welcome to the School Sucks live show. Things are a little different tonight, but I know this is going to work out great. I'm in Connecticut with Richard Grove. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm working the switchboard tonight for
Thank you
Brett,
so much.
and I'm just trying to help out.
So Rich has been on the show. People are familiar with Rich. He's been on the show at least a handful of times. He's on the co-host page, and his website is tragedyandhope.com.
That's right.
And you should also, right at the top here, plug this new film that you just worked on.
I can't talk about Fight Camp.
Fight Camp?
No, it's not Fight Camp.
State of Mind.
I was going to say Fight Club, but then I was thinking Band Camp, and I mixed the two. So, State of Mind, the psychology of control. That's where you can cut back into it if you're editing this, which we're not.
No.
State of Mind, the psychology of control is it's going to release publicly on October 1st, and until October 1st, there's a pre-sales exclusive being done by InfoWars and Alex Jones, and they're distributing the film far and wide until then. And there's a premiere on YouTube, so if you want to see the film before you actually buy it and share it with friends, you're welcome to do that. And I think over 300,000 people checked it out. And a couple people have bought DVDs, and that helps us make another movie.
Yeah. So. And the topic, the general thrust?
The topic. Now we got to get into the topics of it. The psychology of control is basically, if I want to break it down to one sentence, which isn't in the film, it's how people use words to control human beings through history.
Yeah.
So that's how we got on this side of the screen. We discovered that we were being controlled by words, started to study it, and you eventually produce media to try to tell people on that side of the screen what's up.
Yeah, so that's actually a good place for us to start, how we got on this side of the screen, because this is really cool for me to be here and, sitting with you. A lot of people, I might have mentioned this just in passing a couple times, maybe as far back as a couple years ago, but Rich hosted the first podcast that I think I ever listened to called 9/11 Synchronicity.
I didn't know of too many podcasts at that time when I started a podcast, so I was just like, I needed to put out a lot of information, and that seemed like a good format to start laying some stuff down.
Yeah, absolutely. iTunes was practically new then. I think it had existed for about a year.
It was.
So my story was, as many of you know, I was a history teacher, and I met some guy. He was actually an electrician on the New York Stock Exchange, and he was the uncle of a girl I was dating. And, I was telling him, he asked me, what do you do? One of the first three questions you ask when you meet somebody, typically. And I said, I'm a teacher. I teach history. And he goes, oh. It was within 2 or 3 sentences of that, he said, did you know the aliens built the pyramids? I said, I didn't. I don't know anything about that. I will at least listen to you. I will at least hear you out.
I would like to know more. That's what you can say.
So long story short, I investigated that. I actually wound up going back with a 9-year-old boy in just recent years, a couple of years ago, who was real into the ancient alien story and looking into it with him. But he directed me to Coast Radio, which is very popular, millions of listeners, and they deal with a lot of these far out subjects and some not so far out subjects. So sometime around 2005, 2006, he has a roundtable. George Norrie is hosting it. It's Alex Jones, Alex Jones, who everyone in my audience is familiar with, Peter Lance, who was an investigative journalist. Sure. David Ray Griffin, who what was the title of the book that he wrote? New Pearl Harbor?
New Pearl Harbor, and then he did the one on the 9/11 Commission report. Yeah,
and then there was a fourth guy with a police background, but Mike something, I can't remember his name. And Lance and the gentleman with the police background were, against or more on the side of the official story, but there had certainly been a cover-up while Griffin and Jones took the position of, there's a lot more to know about this. So that was my first exposure, not just to Alex Jones, but to this whole 9/11 thing. And I was hooked immediately. And I talked in a recent show about, there's a lot of people who are crapping on the whole 9/11 truth movement or researching some of these conspiracies. Sure. And, I said, we talk about education on my show as like the educational experience should ride on the motivation of the learner. Well, at that point, this is 7-8 years ago, I was highly motivated to get to the bottom of that.
All you have to do is learn a couple contradictions. I mean, all the people that you named on that panel, they would all have different expressions of what 9/11, what they see, different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because some of those guys are just being exposed to a small piece, and others are going out and finding pieces on their own. But if you hear any of the the presentations, there's always a couple contradictions that stick. And then if you're smart enough to start thinking about that, it leads you interesting places.
Yeah, and at the time that I heard it, I was really gravitating towards Peter Lance's position that there had been this massive cover-up. Now, there was a cover-up. So it seemed like the discussion was interesting because everybody was bringing elements of truth to it. And it didn't seem like, I mean, in retrospect, nobody had a monopoly on the truth. And there was a lot of friction during the discussion. But from there, I wanted to find out everything I could. And I had just been introduced to iTunes, so I did 9/11, and there you were. So this was...
It wasn't just smart branding either, because it's the theme of the podcast is not just about 9/11. It's using 9/11 as a keyhole through which you can learn about this whole reality that has kind of been hidden from you.
Yeah.
So it's like through that one event, it's the events that happened that day are just one day. But the events that led up to that day, you can go back 100 years, 200 years with solid, continuous evidence and primary sources that you can get your hands on pretty easily.
Okay, and I don't even think, I mean, people might be listening to this, I don't even think I've taken a hard position on this issue in my show, like publicly, ever.
Yeah.
So I don't believe the official story. I don't believe the, what did they make for people who said the government
made
was
a comic book.
I always think of it as a coloring book. That seems more appropriate.
I think they made a coloring book as well. Rachel Maddow, the Rhodes Scholar, advertises at least the comic book, I'm pretty sure.
Right. So this was the findings of the 9/11 Commission were distilled down into this comic book, and that's how it was presented to the American people. And the more you look into that, the more
even the long version is truth by consensus. I mean, they had to have
total consensus,
total unanimous consensus that each fact went in there. So a lot of people testified. Maybe like William Rodriguez and several other people, whistleblowers that had testified. And when it would go around the commission, if a couple people wanted that in there, I'm sure there's a couple people who are like, no, we have an interest not to have that in there. And provably, those testimonies are not included in the 9/11 Commission report. And provably, the testimonies that they left out help you connect a lot more dots than the testimonies they included.
So, and even just looking at, we will move beyond this, everybody, but even just looking at the setup of the commission and the people are involved, it's basically the admission that there is at the very least, a cover-up of a massive F-up. If nothing else, even if you wanted to just stop there, you should know that for sure.
Well, there's an eerie similarity to the Warren Commission. And the compositing of the Warren Commission and Alan Dulles' involvement, and so here's a guy who had been fired by Kennedy and is a prime suspect in a murder, in my opinion, and he's helping to arrange people on the investigation, and and it's all good. And so since they really haven't been caught for that or called out publicly, they figured they could just do the 9/11 Commission the same way. In fact, they weren't going to have a commission. I think it went 444 days before they actually started that investigation. Then there was censorship. There was people testifying that it's not under oath, so that's not really testimony. And so there's all these loopholes and holes, and they basically throw out a net. Like, there's not a solid story in that report. They're saying, if you accept this net as solid reality, then we're all good. But if you're smart enough to see, hey, that's not a solid piece of fabric there that's all woven together tightly. There's a lot of gaps in there, gaps so big that you could fly a plane through.
Yeah.
So when you look at the people on the 9/11 Commission and what they do and who pays their, who buys their mansions for them and this sort of thing, you find a lot of people in the military-industrial complex. You find specifically in Zelikow, the executive director, after they wanted Kissinger and didn't get him, Zelikow had written articles on catastrophic terrorism in years before, and he and John Deutsch, who was connected to the insider trading, he used to be number 3 at the CIA, had authored that 1998 Foreign Affairs article on catastrophic terrorism that named Pearl Harbor and the World Trade Center and weapons of mass destruction and all these terms that became ubiquitous in everyday language after 9/11 that most people didn't hear of in 1998.
Yeah.
But in going back and looking at it, it's like, wow, these same guys involved in the investigation and potential cover-up were also seeding ideas in the public consciousness. And in the same magazine issue, it also talked about Osama bin Laden, public enemy number 1, and this sort of thing. So they're branding a terrorist. And then they're saying, here's this thing that if it happened, they had a whole list of things that they could do, a centralized national security complex. And so there's like a breakout on the page. There's a gray box, and it's like, if this happened, we could do these things. Well, all those things happened, and then they did all those things. So it was like it's like a business plan. They're not prophets. They're not predicting the future. They're making business plans and not encountering resistance. And a lot of those plans are corrupt and conspiratorial. That's history.
Wouldn't people say, and maybe there's some naivete in that, but wouldn't they say, look, yeah, these people are the experts. Of course they're involved on both ends. Of course they're involved on the predictive side of these kind of events. Sure. And of course they're involved in the investigation. Well,
then I would say if that's the question, then you just have to look closer.
Yeah.
And when you get into their actual writings and get their books, and it's not just reading a couple comments about Brzezinski on the internet. It's, hey, go out and get every book you can afford to get on Brzezinski, or get access to it through PDF or what have you, and start sorting through there and looking for key terms across the books, because what you want to do is piece out the mosaic, because a lot of these books they're very candid, but they're also worded and compartmentalized in such a way that you would need to read more than one to see the bigger picture. Bertrand Russell is an excellent example, because when I first read some of the quotes in The Impact of Science on Society, which I believe was printed in 1953 or 54, he says that quote where, as Fichte laid down, if we had it our way, children would only know what their instructors would have them know and nothing else, right?
Yeah.
And people said, well, Bertrand Russell's a great guy. He would never mean they argued that I was taking out of context. So then I acquired not a PDF copy, I acquired a first edition because I wanted to verify it. I want to know. It doesn't benefit me if I'm wrong and continue making the same mistakes, so I want to learn too. And it's even worse when you read it in the book, because when you put it in context of all these other books that he's written. He wrote The Principles of Social Reconstruction in 1914.
Yeah.
And in there he's talking about scientific dictatorship, world government, the use of eugenics to kind of cull the population, and then those ideas are not just in 1914; they're still there in his writing in 1953 and 1954. And so the other one is The Scientific Outlook, is a book by Bertrand Russell. So these themes are repeated, and he's not the only one, but that's just a good example. And I didn't really know who Bertrand Russell was prior to that, so it gave me an opportunity to meet a very interesting and brilliant mind, albeit under a few influences that violate other people's volition. And so, his thoughts and what he was recommending violates the volition of billions of people here on this planet, and it's for a select few to benefit from. So I think it's unfair, but I think we have to do something about it. Otherwise we can't just say that's unfair and hope they'll change. It's like, no, we got to provide some resistance. It's like that cook, Jamie Oliver, once he disclosed to everybody, he made a video about what's in a McDonald's hamburger as well as the McNuggets. But it was the hamburger that got McDonald's today. The news was that they're going to change the recipe for the hamburger because there was stuff going in the hamburger that was not fit for human consumption before they gave it the ammonia bath.
Yeah, now with less ammonia.
And when I had learned about that, there was an article I read that was like 10 things you don't know about your food.
Yeah.
And I was like, whatever, I know a lot about my food. I've been studying. The pulp, the cellulose ingredient, that's like recycled paper. I wasn't aware of that.
What?
Pretty much anything that's in the middle aisles of the grocery store. Mm-hmm. Pretty much anything with the barcode. If you look at the ingredients and it has cellulose in it, it's a filler. It would be like in Pop-Tarts or pizza crusts or things that might have flour in them. They would add cellulose these days. They are adding cellulose.
Yeah, folks, shop the perimeter. 90+% of your time in that supermarket should be in the perimeter, in my opinion. Meat, dairy,
and it's
veggies.
Not easy to afford it, but I would rather eat less and have quality food, and whatever. I mean, I can't subject myself to what I now see when I drive past the fast food restaurants as poison, because those people are not my friends, and it took me a long time. I mean, up until I would say it's been maybe 6 months since I had something bad for me at one of those restaurants, just because we were out traveling or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes it's an emergency.
Yeah, sometimes it's an emergency, and I didn't feel like sick afterwards, but you're still learning, and as you learn, it starts to have more adherence, and you're less attracted to it, because we've been conditioned millions of times by McDonald's commercials and all these things, and we had people had birthday parties. Do you ever have a birthday party at McDonald's when you were a kid?
I feel like I did.
I had one like when I was 4 years old, but they had me there, man.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, what a positive memory imprinted on your fragile mind. As a child. So back to 2005. I'm listening to Rich's podcast. I'm trying to
2006.
2006, yeah. Let's say 2006. And I'm spending my days painting a house. So I can consume, by the time I find your show, there's maybe 3 of them. They're long enough. I mean, the first couple were short, but they get pretty long.
Yeah.
So I consume that immediately, and then I start finding interviews with you, and I just think it's the most fascinating story. You kind of laid it all out initially in something called Project Constellation, that you had this insider, and I encourage people to go check it out. I'm sure it's available online.
It's on tragedyandhope.com under audio. It's under the podcast, like podcast audio. It's at the bottom.
Yeah. So not only was this story exciting and new compared to what a lot of people were saying about 9/11, but it was, it was very eloquent. It was very well laid out. And I had one of these at the time, a MacBook Pro, and I opened GarageBand, and I said, well, I have this experience in education, and I have all these ideas, and I was starting to discover some new shows at the time. Now, I didn't have what I would call a mind map. I didn't have anything kind of anchoring my thinking. That other things could orbit around in a way that made sense. So what I really had was a collage. But I started trying to lay out all these ideas in what had always been a comfortable format for me, just talking through it.
Sure.
And I wound up with something that was about 2.5 hours. Now, unfortunately, it's lost to the world today. But I probably wouldn't stand by most of it. But I was
actually only the NSA has it, Brett. That's what you mean.
Is there a way? Do they have like a release
People
form?
have been FOIAing and saying, hey, I lost such and such data, and I know you guys have a copy of it, and, or they're being prosecuted, and they're like, hey, NSA, I know you can prove where I was that night, or what,
Yeah.
So there's just all these stories going out there now, and they're just like, no, pretend it doesn't exist, so...
And it's probably going to get pretty tedious for them when somebody's like, hey, like 2 months ago, I was on xvideos.com and I saw this great video, and I can't remember the name of me. The name of it? I cleared my history. So anyway, at that point, I was off and running, and I was trying to put my thoughts together. I had listened to other people communicate. I was inspired, and I was trying to put my thoughts into a coherent form. And
so was I still back then.
Oh, yeah.
It's the challenge to this day to put your thoughts in coherent form, but it's learning a new skill. It's exercising the active literacies, and that was like your first workout.
Yeah. So, and that was the thing. I mean, you got to. I think I got to a point where also I was starting to get bombarded with other podcasts.
Yeah.
Free Talk Live, and eventually Complete Liberty with Wes Bertrand, and eventually Free Domain Radio, and there was more competing with my attention. And you were there was. I think I wound up feeling a little bit overwhelmed by some of the places you were going, and I think that's okay. Yeah,
I was looking for other people that might know more than me that weren't evil.
right. And that was how you found Jan Irvin, right?
Actually, I knew Jan before that.
Oh, really?
I found Jan because I was looking for more Terrence McKenna MP3s because I had first heard him like in 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
And it was hard to get stuff back then on. So I was looking on the internet, and Jan has this set called the She Who Remembers Archives, which is this woman named Jeannie Erstad used to go around to all these cool talks back in like these 70s, 80s, 90s, and she'd have a tape recorder and hook it up, and you'd get a recording of Dave Emery or John Rappaport or any of these people. So Jan's purveying these archives that come on a bunch of DVDs and CDs and stuff like that. There's like 700 hours. There's a whole bunch. It's just eclectic, esoteric information that it's not being put in front of you.
Right.
And some of it turns out after 10 years of listening to be valid, and some of it turns out to be, hey, those were interesting talks, but it's not necessarily exactly what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And so, I had found those archives, and then I started talking to Jan. He happened to be writing a couple interesting books at that time, and over the years between working with him, that helped to get my confidence up, and he's the one that first recommended that I do a podcast, and then he started the podcast after he saw me doing it because he's like, hey, I can do that too.
Yeah.
But when you tell someone to do it,
wow.
When you tell someone to do it, you're like, hey, you should put that on a podcast. My answer is like, I don't know how to podcast, and so the idea when he throws it out there, he doesn't know how to do it either at that point, and so it sits there for a while, and then I'm like, wait a minute, what is there that I can't do here? Right. And then basically I started trying to communicate with Project Constellation. I burned it to CD. So it took 2 CDs. So it would come to you in like a DVD case with 2 CDs, and you put it in your CD player. Cause the idea was, because it's like on paper, 33 pages or 34 pages, something like that. It's kind of long. I know most people don't read. But if you got a CD and you could just put it in your CD player, a lot of people would listen. And if you listen, they might sit down or put it in their car or whatever. So I was just trying to communicate with people who had larger platforms, and then we're talking about these topics, and said, hey, there's a bunch of valid points that are very substantial and very relevant and very provable. and they could be evidence in a courtroom, you know, but no one's talking about any of these things. No one's talking about the corporate connections or the people who had vested interest and people who were insider trading. Because when I first found the evidence that I found about insider trading and stuff like that was, well, how did the Muslims do this? Like, how did they get a firm controlled by the CIA's John Deutsch to make these trades? Oh, wait, the CIA is running them. Oh, okay. And then you start, whoa, they're supposed to be guarding this country. What? The people guarding this, like the wolf is in the hen house, everybody. And so that's what Project Constellation was kind of about, but not in a Chicken Little kind of way. It was saying, hey, these things are going on, and here's what we can do about them. And I was kind of asking someone else to do these things at the end. I'm like, there needs to be commercial-free media to tell people, you know. And
you were trying to reach out to celebrities. And
I tried to reach out to anybody that I thought might care about this country or have the resources or a platform to speak free. So I got a cease and desist from Larry Flint because I was like, hey, this guy's got a magazine and people in Afghanistan and Iraq are reading his magazine.
Sure.
So if we could say something about 9/11, that'd be great. I think I got the cease and desist in 2003 from the Flint brothers.
Yeah.
But a year later, he ran this whole 9/11 thing on David Ray Griffin. It's not what I would have put in the article, but at least I'm like, at least those guys over there are getting a chance to be like, hey, you guys aren't being told the real story. And a lot of guys signed up emotionally after September 11th. They're like, we're going to go protect this country and that sort of thing. And what they signed up for is like, it's a bait and switch. It's a bait and switch. And there's historical precedents that should have been taught to us in this country, in our schools, that would prevent people from massively, you know, like en masse, emotionally reacting to what I would say is a snuff film that was broadcast over and over and over and over again. And to this day, there's never been a legitimate evidence trail. We investigate. Like when you look at any of the supposed evidence that people use, you have to ask, what was the chain of custody on the security tape that shows these guys going through Boston Logan Airport?
Yeah.
And, you know, what are the 6 ways you can identify a commercial airliner from its radar signature and its, the unique serial numbers on each of its pieces and all these different things, transponder. And what, you know, and when you go through and you find all these other inaccuracies, it's like, wait a minute, how can it go off radar and turn off its transponder? And at the same time, like 2 hijacked planes are crossing over a military base. And then after they cross over, stuff turns back on. And it's like, I don't know how the Arab terrorists did that. I was interested. But then I found out they're smuggling drugs through Stewart Air Force Base and doing all sorts of different stuff. Like they were smuggling ecstasy from Germany into the country through that same military base. So it's like, you have to throw your hands up at one point and say, whoa, I guess I don't know anything. I guess I have to throw away that which I was taught.
Yeah.
Because these things are very real and I have to deal in reality every day. I can't live in the bubble they gave me, like, and be in reality. It's like they don't, you know, it doesn't work together.
Well, the problem is for a lot of people, and I've certainly been guilty of this myself in the past too, is that whenever we encounter one of these uncomfortable unknowns, it leaves a crater that we feel quickly needs to be filled with something.
Splinters.
So
emotional splinters is the word we used in the last episode.
Sure. Well, the reason why I like the hole is because it needs to be filled. So, you know, I mean, and this was one of the things that I found compelling about the 9/11 truth movement initially was, oh, okay, because, you know, as somebody who had studied history and read Howard Zinn and read Noam Chomsky at the point that I started getting into this stuff, I was like, this is the dumbest story I've ever heard. This is ridiculous. Adults believe this. And I think initially when people were so paralyzed by fear, everybody, you know, maybe not the people who were right there on the ground, but most people who wound up not believing it believed it initially. I know I did.
Well, I would even add another category to it. I think I was kind of numb to it for about a month or so.
Yeah.
Because at the end of October, I was still going to funerals for people that I had worked for. So
yeah.
And I remember there was a time at the end of October, Marsha McLennan had a memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is the biggest, like, this big cathedral in New York City, right across from Rockefeller Center.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I'm standing in the back, and there's all these people in there, like Giuliani and all these other people, Bernie Carrick, like the people that I saw as kind of being suspects. Like, you should question these people and why they said what they said and did what they did on that day.
And portrayed as the heroes.
And they are up at the front, and all these families are like grieving, and they're thrown, like, I'm just like, you guys are being duped. I don't know how yet, but there's a lot of contradictions, and, you know, it was just kind of like sickening, and I was like, because you don't know what's going on. Yeah, and no one wants to feel like that. You feel helpless. You feel kind of in shock. So what you have to do to get out of that is start asking those questions, which you already have. Those are the splinters, and start changing your habits to find substantial answers. And that starts with reading. Good books. And I could lead people to 100 great books that would just wipe out their uncertainty. And you don't have to read all 100, but you can read 5 and wipe out a lot of uncertainty and then go into the details if you want.
Right. But most people sort of numb the splinters or the awareness of the whole with the fastest story that they can find. So the official story was very appealing. It was like it's a very James Bondish kind of bad guys without motives.
And it came out a half hour after the event because I've gone back and watched all the tapes over and I've looked all the different channels, and so it's like one day I'm like, hey, who was the first person to report Osama bin Laden in connection with this crime? Do you know the answer to that?
I remember seeing as the discomfort, the splinters, or the discomfort, or the hole that I felt initially as I'm watching this unfold, and I'm saying, "Hey, wait a minute! I'm a student of history. How come I have no idea about anything in this part of the world? If something like this could be the result of their politics?"
Sure,
I'd never learned anything. In college,
even if you knew about Wahhabism. Like, you wouldn't necessarily understand the story as it unfolded that morning because allegedly they were Muslim extremists who come from the Wahhabi sect, and it started in Saudi Arabia in the 1920s and 30s. Muslim Brotherhood, I think, 1928.
Yeah,
and that's kind of a Masonic, CIA, OSS funded Anglo-American establishment way to use Muslims as proxies. That's who set up the oil fields for BP and everything in Saudi Arabia. So when things point back to Saudi Arabia, that's a cover for MI6 and CIA, or back then OSS. That's an interesting leg of history. But to answer the question, I think her name's Andrea Mitchell, and she's Alan Greenspan's wife. Alan Greenspan's wife is the first person to announce on TV, or maybe via phone call to the station, that Osama bin Laden has been connected to these crimes. And it's like a half hour after the event. Like, the Pentagon, like, the buildings didn't even fall yet. And they're like, Osama bin Laden, and who's saying it? Like, are these people Council on Foreign Relations related? Are they related? Are they pitching the story from 1998? Did they just say, oh, this guy, these two articles are?
You mean out of Foreign Affairs?
They're not solving problems that morning. They were reading scripts all day. Everybody on TV, when you watch those tapes back, they're all way too comfortable with the gravamen of that event. Right? And then you've got things later in the day, like the BBC reporting 20 minutes before Building 7 falls. And that's scripted, and it came from Reuters. And then it's like, who owns Reuters? Who's financially in charge of the people that send news to other news agencies that they just read? Right? So there's all these.
The one thing that stuck out for me, and I remember seeing it, because I worked in marketing at the time at a ski resort, and we were just sitting in front of the television, pretty much, flipping through the cable channels, watching it unfold. And this guy gives this interview, right? He's wearing, I think, a Harley Davidson
t-shirt. I know who you're talking about.
Okay. And he says,
damage mostly due to fire.
Damage mostly due to fire. And then I saw the buildings collapse, obviously because of the intense. And I'm like, that's not a real man.
Well,
but
that's your conclusion.
It's
from your gut.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
But you have to analyze it, because if for instance, that's a big problem with the 9/11 truth movement. 9/11's an inside job. That's a conclusion without stating your argument, giving clear terms and true premises. And so it's like discombobulated. The proper way to structure and communicate information that we're used to is you start with the individual parts, how they connect together, and here's what it means. That's the grammar, logic, and rhetoric of the situation.
Right.
So in assessing a clip like that, we would have to find out, like, what station aired it, what time did it air, these sort of things. What's the identity of the character in there? Is he a guy that legitimately works down there, or is he a guy reading a script and, just giving them the news that they want put out? Because to act like psychological warfare does not go on in our media means you have not researched the sources of the major media outlets. Because if you looked into CBS, it was run for a long time by this guy named William S. Paley. Ever hear of him?
Yes.
Okay, look him up. Psychological warfare since like the 1930s. How about Time Life? That's C.D. Jackson. He was psychological warfare for Eisenhower, the president, and during a war, the general.
Yeah.
Right? Nelson Rockefeller. He was psychological warfare operations. This is very easy to look up, but the fact that it remains off people's radar means they neglect that aspect in considering information. So when I read one of those magazines, when I read any newspaper or magazine or watch the news or whatever, I'm considering that the people running it are very well versed and multi-generationally practiced in neurolinguistic programming, psychological warfare techniques, these sort of things where they're able to, I don't know, take away your free will,
Right.
control what you're thinking as far as taking away the choice that you would make and getting you to take a choice that you normally wouldn't make.
Right.
That's advertising or marketing. I mean, all those things are talked about within State of Mind, the psychology of control, oddly enough, but they also go on like so many other places that you can only introduce those concepts in a movie. You can't break them down for the audience in a movie because the movie's not long enough. You can do it in a podcast. You can do it in a series. But really, in my opinion, like movies are introductions to these topics. A lot of the documentaries that we've watched, that's it. We watch The World Against Monsanto. We might protest against it, but not many people go and look. It's like, where did Monsanto come from? What family is that? What are their interests? Who funded them over the past century? Because I think they came around in 1908. And then you just get back into the history. You start getting back into people who fund wars and commit genocide and do all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah,
so it's
sure.
like even just investigating where your food comes from or what some of these companies do are going to lead you back to certain main themes in the 20th century, like Cecil Rhodes' Last Will and Testament, the Round Table Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, because those groups are so widely influential by this point after 100 years.
So yeah, and just back to what you mentioned a second ago about a film versus a larger research project. It was kind of a blessing in disguise because I was telling you how I put together this audio presentation, and I'm thinking documentary. That's what I wanted to do. I saw myself as becoming a filmmaker. I didn't understand at the time. I said, well, geez, if I have great ideas and I have a compelling way to tell a story, bam. That's how. But
you've been on the path to be a filmmaker the whole time because the first thing you have to learn is audio.
Yeah,
and now we're doing video, so it's pretty close, dude.
Absolutely,
almost there.
But I realized that I wasn't in the filmmaking business. I was. My motivation, my purpose was to communicate. To communicate these ideas,
right.
though.
That's not part of the business that is set up out there in the market. So you would be creating a new market space.
Yeah,
and then you would have to market it. You can get people there and figure out some distribution model, but it's possible. But that's why most really good conscious informational things aren't getting seen by people, because in order to get it seen or to get a movie made or funded, it has to fit in this pre-made template where everyone feels comfortable that they're going to make their money back.
Right. Sure. So. Well, I mean, and the good thing is that when I still had this passion and felt that I had this purpose to communicate these ideas, sure. I just happened to be here at the perfect time to discover a new format for doing that. And, I kind of, I guess, dragged my heels for a while, really wanting to figure out how can I communicate this in some kind of film in an hour and a half. And when I felt like I just didn't have the time or the resources, which I frankly didn't have in 2009, it had built up to such a point where I said, okay, I'm going to go to Radio Shack and get a microphone and start simple and start communicating these ideas. So I'm glad it happened that way, because it's also given me a great opportunity to do a ton more research than I would have needed to do for a film, because you could only convey so much information in that short period of time.
My question would be if I had the knowledge and experience to make the film. Yeah. Is your idea from a couple years ago still the film that you would make today?
No.
Or, exactly.
You're right.
Or have you grown past that and learned so much along the journey that it redefines the project, and now your project's going to be even better? I mean, that's what happened to Paul Verge. Like, he started making the sequel to Hijacking Humanity.
Yeah.
It was called Believers Beware.
Yeah.
And then he learned so much during that filmmaking process that he was like, the original idea doesn't fit anymore. He's like, I've outgrown and outlearned that idea. And there was some inaccuracies. And you can't just include those known inaccuracies if you have control over the film. I mean, if you're throwing it over the wall, it doesn't matter. You don't have any control over it. But if you have control over it, you owe it to your audience to do the best job that you have. And if that means scrapping your original script and taking the footage that you actually have that shows this larger idea and trying to cut it together.
I thought initially when I really started to research doing the podcast instead, I thought I had 6 to 10 hours of information to communicate. 6 to 10 hours.
How's that going?
Well, I mean, I realized that once people come to understand all of the things they're not being taught in school, we have, endless things that we can cover on this show. We just did a series about the Cold War and the legality of truth telling. And the real, what my research has led me to understand, is the real subversion of America that people were so afraid of, because they were getting pelted, their conscious minds, with all of this information that they couldn't organize in a way that made sense.
Subversion that people don't get to know about when there's censorship and people being taken off to crazy secret prisons.
Right, sure.
Gulag system or any of this stuff. It's like, that's not cool.
Right.
And our taxpayer dollars are paying for that. It's like, there's a lot of things going on here that violate everyone's free will.
Yeah.
And I think at some point we should all just get together on that and be like, all right, we recognize these things. Now what can we do together?
Right.
And we could do whatever. As individuals that are not getting our volition violated, we can do anything we want.
And that was the lesson of that series. The thing we should do together is not panic.
Not
that's
panic
what people
and start
did.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Don't panic. Start thinking.
And, people had that post-war hypervigilance left over, that PTSD hypervigilance. It definitely picked up on something that was really happening, but they didn't understand what.
Well, that goes back to the law of identity and the basics of philosophy, because they knew something was going on, but I think it was very poorly defined, and you can't define something until you get to know it.
Yeah.
And so because they're scared of it, they just wanted to catch it. But really, in order to deal with something that's in opposition, you have to learn how to understand it to predict its behavior or any of these other things. It's just like fishing.
Yeah.
You need to learn what kind of bait the fish likes, and, you can have dinner.
Yeah. And we're still, I think, unfortunately, for most people, we're still right there. It's Mexicans. It's Muslims. They're still, they
some group of people, it doesn't look like you. Isn't God cool to organize everything like that? It's just that simple, everybody. You can just kind of just open your eyes. Oh, I can tell who's the problem and who's not. No, it's not like that.
Right.
That's an epistemological cartoon. It's cartoonish to even, you're really not thinking about it. You're not looking at the metaphysics of it. And, we all have red blood.
Right, right. So if anybody has anything that they want a comment read into the show, or a question
exciting.
for one of us, please type in all caps. That makes it real easy for me to just glance over. And
that way he doesn't have to put his glasses on.
I don't even have glasses. I realize, should the screen look blurry from here? Should size 12 font look blurry from 3 feet?
I can see when it's further away from here, but I was noticing, like, when something gets really close, I can't see it. I don't know.
Interesting.
Maybe it's always been like that, and I just noticed it, though.
Yeah, so if anybody has, we've been talking, and I haven't. The chat's been going by. I've been glancing at it, but I can't really pick up the context.
I can't believe that you would have an audience here and ignore them, dude. I mean, that's such a.
I know, it's a lot of people too
this is
tonight.
Your first time? Are you rookie host?
No, we usually have a third. The third person is usually in charge of monitoring the chat.
Where's Osborne? Get him over here.
He would be into this. He would enjoy this conversation, I think.
Yeah. We could talk books.
Yeah.
Actually, if Osborne is going to make a trip at some point to be on the show, I would like a list of all his conspiratorial objections. All the things that people say, it couldn't be going on because too many people would know, or they'd tell somebody, all these little objections. I want to collect all those objections because I think I could satisfy most of them with logical, reasonable evidence.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
because I think he fancies himself a bit of a skeptic. Or it's not. It's I think
he's not prejudiced. So
no.
I just don't think he's had access to this information, which is the same with everyone else. So if we can have a conversation that helps other people go through that same conversation with their friends and family, because I don't think my friends and family are prejudiced. I just think that they haven't taken the time to understand the gravamen and the nature of the gravamen means like the weightiness. Like what it means. Like this stuff means a lot. It's very important information.
Sure.
I think a lot of people fail to grasp how it's so important to almost every aspect of their lives at this point.
Right.
And useful tools. That's what I'm into creating.
What I think the questions that, I just know from the interactions that I've had with a lot of people in my audience, They would say, the first question they would ask, it would be a yes or no question, is this useful information to me? Right. And it's a yes or no. And some would say yes, and some would say no. Maybe it's not. I don't know if it's useful, but it's interesting. So proceed.
Sure.
But then they would say, okay, what are my capabilities as far as processing it in a meaningful way that has some constructive outcome?
Sure.
Is there a way? Is there a way that I can turn this story that you guys just covered? And I did get a couple, critical comments about the show we just did. And it's like, how do you turn that into something constructive? Oh. And then how much of this can actually be retained, right? With the buzz and the busyness of my normal life, can I really hold on to this story in my memory? Because a lot of people...
Do you want to answer those questions in reverse order?
Yeah, go ahead.
Much can you retain? How far can you run on their first day?
Yeah.
Your mind needs exercise. You'll be able to retain more as you go along. to answer your first question, if it wasn't relevant to every aspect of my life, I wouldn't spend any time on this. If it was just interesting, I would not spend any time on this. I had 30 years before I started learning to do look at interesting things or whatever. I didn't do much substance, didn't do much learning, and it cost me. It cost me my career.
Yeah.
It cost me having a house, cost me having a nice life with kids and all this other stuff that people enjoy. And so I put in the work because that's the only way I would ever have a chance to have some of that. I think we're probably too old to have kids, but at some point maybe we'll have a house.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point we won't have a 15-year-old car that I got to add fluid to every time before I drive it,
Yeah.
these sort of things. So I'm still learning, and I try not to be prejudiced against my predispositions of things that I thought I knew, because I know that I didn't really look seriously into those things. I just took people's declarative sentences and I kind of adopted them as my own.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to have anything, I think I would have some, original thoughts. And those are only going to come from asking questions and finding substantial answers.
Yeah.
And that's how it's relevant. So when you start doing that, you lead into all this information. So the point is, if somebody has a question of, well, how is all this relevant? How is the last will and testament of Cecil Rhodes relevant to me? I don't know. Do you read the newspaper?
Yeah.
Do you drive a car? Do you pay for electricity or oil, or do you mow your grass? Because all these things tie back into the British culture and the British indoctrination and the British control. It's not just British. It's an Anglo-American establishment. They've pretty much blurred the lines. But the point is, this country fought for independence against Britain, and then they basically brainwashed us to believe that, no, we're all buddies and it's all good, and you guys can take on the royalty system. And everyone worships that new kid born into the royal family. I mean, Americans have turned into sycophants.
Absolutely.
And if people don't know what that means, it's a good time to look it up.
And the history has also been blurred to the point where it was like, well, after 1812, everything was fine. The United States almost went to war with Britain over South American or Central American interests at the end of the 19th century. 1895, they almost went to war. So there's been a lot more tension in this relationship on both sides for a lot longer than people have known about. But there's also been a real desire of a closed group to reunite the whole thing. America is the greatest as far as it's the greatest geopolitical treasure in the world.
Oh, sure, but they didn't just want the treasure; they wanted to use America to take over the rest of the world.
Absolutely,
this is the springboard to
tip of the spear
to do it to everyone else, and to create something like what you see in Elysium, where eventually they want to live a very different lifestyle than we are. In reality, they want to have extended life or eternal life through technology, and they want separate, terrariums to live in, to be isolated from us. And you got a comment over there?
We got a lot. We got a lot to read here.
Jeez.
Those are good answers though, because a lot of people say, well, that doesn't matter to me.
Scroll back up.
All right, so you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Richard, like your shirt. That's
it's by Daniel at We Are 30s on my Twitter. He's in Montana, and he's listening to the School Sucks podcast, as well as Peace Revolution and Corbett Report. So this is what somebody did. They were listening and said, "What could I do?" And he's like, "Hey, I got some T-shirt designs." And usually I say, I look at them, I'm like, "Nah, no thanks." But he had several. I was like, "Yeah, dude, send them to me. I'll wear them. I don't have any T-shirts. I could use a couple new T-shirts."
Yeah, that's nice. Good colors.
Wake up from the American dream.
Then somebody says, Brett, can you guys talk about what as peace revolutionaries are supposed to do about the growing police state?
Well, if you're talking, I would say everything that you want to learn through the internet, you want to apply locally with your friends and family.
Yeah.
So if you live in a community and there's a police, organization near you that's, trying to do business, and you're aware that they're getting war wagons on all this advanced military technology, well, first, nobody's really effective by themselves. So you got to be an individual, be responsible for your own thoughts, know how to discern fact from fiction. Those are the basics. Now find other people like that in your area and get together and say, hey, why are we militarizing our police? What is the big threat around here? What are we scared of? And remember that the people that work in those uniforms go home at night. They got wife and kids. They might go to school with your kids. So it's about, in my opinion, re-meeting your neighbors and becoming communities again, and not having groupthink or getting collectivized, but as autonomous individuals saying, hey, what is best for our community to keep us safe? Where are these tax dollars coming from? Where are they going? Because all that funding's coming from someplace. They're just using tax dollars from somebody else's state that they really get at gunpoint. And they're like, we'll fund these guys over here who really don't have a military need for that type of equipment in a lot of parts of this country.
Yeah.
So first, you have to become a competent, able individual, and then once you do that, you can compassionately communicate with other people voluntarily and get things done. But that doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen with a consistent habit, and you meet new people all the time when you use a currency of appreciation.
Yeah, and that compassion is really important. Just automatically orienting the police into the category of enemy is very counterproductive. And I think that even though the police are certainly involved in a lot of things all over the country that I really strongly object to.
You've seen the video, "Don't Talk to the Cop," right?
Yeah,
the one with the attorney, and then the cop says everything the attorney just said is right.
Yeah.
So they're not going to just extend those things. They bait people. They use something called the REID technique, REID.
Yeah,
I advise people to read up on it, because if a policeman stops you and they start to interrogate you or any of this sort of stuff, you are at an advantage, not a disadvantage, to know what they're going to do. Here's their process. Here's what they're trying to do. They need people to incriminate themselves. And if you're innocent, why would you provide them some sort of data that they can twist around and use against you? So you have to kind of learn the protocols. And it's more of that's how you could have the confidence to act polite and keep your cool, because you have knowledge about the techniques that they're using when they want to interrogate or stop and frisk or TSA. So the more you know about the things that cause us fear, what are the basis of our fear? Let's start there. Uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
But really, all fears stem around someone taking away our free will.
Right.
Spider, snake, burglar, any of these things, they could take away your free will. Right? Monstrous government, state, things like this, they take away your free will.
Right.
So I think it says something that the true nature of a human being, like our fears, are based around, losing our free will. That's a building block, I think, that we could all go forward with. It's like, keeping our right to keep ourselves alive and to have property, to do that, to work and be able to, sustain ourselves and be individuals. Right. Like there's something between being an individual and the nature that humans have fear, and what's at the base of those fears, and then people who play on those fears, right? So it's like, if you can't understand those internal, they're concepts that are implicit until you learn about them to make them explicit. Explicit is like putting handles on them so you can grab them and move them around and kind of get a grip on these ideas.
Yeah.
Right? So it's metaphors.
Remember, too, that as far as compassion is concerned, you have a much better chance of making a meaningful connection with an actual police officer than the people who are actually, moving the police state forward. I mean, most of these people, as most people are in their jobs in education and psychiatry, they are obedient and they're doing what somebody else is telling them to do. And they have absolutely no questions about that, because no one has ever introduced them to anything that contradicts
their job.
That.
It's okay, because it's their job. Someone who is an authority told them to do that. What I would say is, you never want to feed into anything that would allow them to maintain and increase their budgets.
Yeah,
like they are prepared for, and they kind of grow off of violence. There's some group of people on this planet who seem to get off on violence. Yeah, it's been going on a long time. Yeah. And as long as we are brought into this world and are given some information about that to keep ourselves safe and learn how to tell fact from fiction, then I think everyone could get along just fine. But there's a couple purposeful obstacles, roadblocks, pitfalls dug out, minefields laid that are very profitable to a small group of people who don't really know how to survive any other way, because they're not creative minded. They're not inspired. They're not curious. They're acting out a role that was written for them by their parents and grandparents, and I kind of feel sorry for them.
Yeah. Just one more comment on the police while it's on my mind. It seems like a couple of decades ago, there was this trend in the media that we are, trying to take people's faith in the police away. And the idea was that, what will replace the police? But it seems like, especially with the people coming home from these wars and, joining the perfect job, becoming a cop, that the police as they were are just being transformed to the police as
what's the military.
They would want as somebody who is, really trying to take away, whether you want to talk about sovereignty or free will or just, the last bit of freedom in America anyway. You don't bring in, I guess there would be an advantage to bringing in troops from another country who don't have a problem seeing other Americans or Americans as the enemy.
Especially if they don't speak English. Like the troops they would bring in to manage America, if that sort of thing happened, they would bring in Chinese troops, Russian troops, anyone who doesn't speak English, because then you'd have empathy and sympathy for people, and not want to just manhandle them. But that's what goes on around the rest of the world. And it doesn't have to be that way.
But obedience, the obedience creates that language barrier. As far as empathy is concerned,
Sure.
yeah, I don't have. It's hard for me to really have an empathic experience with somebody who's telling me about their problems in German. But that obedience, just following orders and conforming to the expectations that these police officers have, that creates that language barrier.
Well, so does the costume. I mean, I think there was a time not so long ago we fought a country called Germany, and they had these people called the SS, and they wore black uniforms to intimidate people. And I'm pretty sure that there was a law enacted that American forces could not wear black because it was a symbol of the Nazis and SS and stuff. And they may have changed that. But you have far too many policemen that don't look like policemen anymore. They look like people, full-time SWAT team or covert ops. And, as long as we have policemen who are out there who are so, I don't know, they have this way of just getting the police scared so that they want all the protection and all the armament that they can get, right? But they also think that Muslim terrorists attacked this country, so everyone's kind of protecting the wrong door, if you will. And, they used to be about protect and serve, but now it's just they're like corporate dogs. They're corporate dogs that guard the corporation's interests, and it's not really about solving crimes. Like, what do you want in a police force in your local town? Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You want accountability, you want honesty, you want integrity, you want good investigation techniques. Something happens, you want to get it solved and root it out.
Right.
It's not that anymore. It's like, it's protection for gangsters. It's enforcement for gangsters in a lot of places. Not all cops. No. And I don't know many cops that signed up for that. But once you get there and you're trying to work through and get your retirement or get your promotion and you have a family, like there are social pressures that are brought to bear on people who work in not just government agencies, but also corporations. And I mean, I was just a little naive. I was a little young. I hadn't had all this investment in a house and kids and boat and all this other stuff that people I worked with. So when I was like, well, this is wrong and I'm going to do something about it, I gambled away my future. Yeah, I bet wrong. There was no investigation.
Well, you gambled away that future.
Oh, yeah, that future, which isn't a bad thing.
Right,
because I was pretty ignorant and I was kind of on cruise control through life, and I wasn't thinking. It was like autopilot, right?
Yeah.
So becoming conscious, waking up is now going through not work. It's like a labor of love. This is called living, when you have to think through all these decisions every day and actually put thinking in between stimulus and response. There's a space. But I think that space has been cemented over. So what we kind of have to do is between stimulus and response, we need to jackhammer through that and create a space. And that's where we put thinking, and that's where choice starts to grow. And that's what makes our future, and that's what gives us freedom. But they've kind of like patched over. They're
and
like,
that's where our growth comes from, too.
Like stimulus response, operant conditioning. They're like, just patch that in with TV and movies and don't let people do thinking anymore.
And it's not just thinking, it's personal growth too that is in that space, because
that's self-reliance, self-confidence, and self-esteem, which come from actually doing things and being familiar with your surroundings.
Right. Somebody else says, there was another question here. Bear with me for a second, folks. You're very patient. Could either do you guys have any advice on staying aware when watching movies or mainstream media instead of going into a passive state?
Oh, yeah. Question mark. Question, if you're watching a movie, like if you're watching something high dollar value Hollywood production, I would start using your question mark. That is the thing you can do, unless if they're using some sort of physical mind control, if they got some chip on you, if you're hooked up to electrodes, the question mark doesn't work very well. I'll tell you the truth. Like if they got their hands on you, question mark might get you out of there somehow, but it's not going to deal with the mind control aspects of that, right? They put the God helmet on you. I don't think the question mark works. All other circumstances of mind control involve people using words to tell you untruths, and you can lock that truth up and unlock it using your mind and figure it out, whether it's truth or not truth, and you can either lock it out or bring it in. And you have to be conscious of your stimuli. You have a choice on all this stimuli. So if somebody's saying something to me and I think it's neurolinguistic programming, I will tune that out and start thinking of something else. or I'll ask questions in my head and say that's not necessarily true, or I'll start, you start having that internal dialogue that Gatto talks about at the beginning of the Ultimate History lesson. And so you can, it's a variety of questions that can start unlocking you from someone trying to like wall you in with some, psychological warfare techniques.
And really, one of the best inventions too, as far as technology is concerned, for being able to work on this process ourselves is the pause button. Right?
Because pause into Google.
Yeah, I used to. There's conversations with history. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Harry Chrysler, I think it's like University of California, and he has all these intellectual heavy hitters.
Sure.
And a lot of them are, this Harry Chrysler is just a host. He's just asking questions and he's eating out of their hands.
Right.
And he's expecting you as the audience of this podcast or this video series to basically do the same thing.
Right.
Well, this was another way. I was painting houses. I was off for the summer from teaching. So in the summer, I used to paint houses. And I'd be on a ladder and I'd just pull out the iPod and I'd pause. And I'd be by myself and I'd just start talking to myself about the problems that I had with what I just experienced. And it's okay to do this.
That's how you begin podcasting. You start talking to yourself and you're like, wait, I should record this for someone else.
And then I did it in the car and people will catch you, but that doesn't matter, right? They look in your car and they say, I wish I was in there. I wish I knew.
They thought you were talking to someone on the phone,
about.
That's all.
Right. Well, no, it doesn't matter. Yeah. They say, no, I wish I was in that car. I'd be learning something. Look at that guy talking to himself. So that really helped me, make better sense of it, because it comes at you fast, and it's never come at us faster than it's coming at us right now. All of this information, and
that's why it's important, because they are putting out. Well, it's just exponentially more information coming out all the time. I mean,
and it's kind of the wash too. It's kind of the German idealism. Well, look at all these opinions. I guess they just kind of integrate into everybody's entitled to theirs. And
the first filter is relevant or not relevant,
right?
And then filter into substantial or arbitrary, and then you're left with substantial. That's cool stuff to go through. Go through it as you had time, and then prioritize what you need to go through.
Absolutely.
So that takes the infinity that's on the internet plus n+1 down to something that's manageable. And then in your search, you might even find something how to manage your time. And then you can incorporate time to learn new things and time for unscheduled meetings, because these are the things that kind of throw people off and throw them into confusion and fear and anxiety. And those are the things I like to stay away from. And I found by exercising my mind, by learning how to run more than one block in my mind, basically. Extending my attention span is what I mean by that. And I help other people do that by producing content that's longer than most people are used to.
Sure.
But, I get so much positive feedback from people who are doing kind of, there could be someone kayaking, for 8 hours. And they're like, hey, I listened to an episode of your podcast the whole time. Like, and, they didn't have to stop and go look for more stuff to listen. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And if you don't have time to listen to it in one sitting, then you can carve out an hour a night and then look, spend half hour listening, half hour looking stuff up. It might take you a week or 2 weeks to go through the episode, but think about what you'll know after that week or 2 weeks, and think about how, you'll just be so impressed with your mind's ability to grow if you just kind of try to exercise it. It will respond. It's a natural process. The thing that I use, the brain model software, I would argue that actually creates physical synapses. When you are learning and putting it in there, you're training your brain.
Yeah.
It's not someone else controlling your brain. I mean, someone else has been programming our brains for a good part of our lives. I would like to spend the rest of my life programming my brain myself. Thank you very much.
Right.
And the way I learned to do that was not put things into model that I really haven't looked up. And so as I look things up or learn new things, I incorporate it into the model. And it's a pretty decent habit. I do it pretty regularly. And it's not everything, but it's what I need to do. It's what I need to know thus far to get my job done.
Right.
And as I learn more, I put more in there, and then I make it available so that other people can do likewise. Now, I will say, if you just look at my brain model and cruise through there and you're learning stuff, you're going to learn about 1/10 as much as if you actually start adding to it yourself or building your own model or doing any of these things.
I think we should do like a half an hour when we have more time, because I want to be respectful of your schedule. Yeah. We've got about 15 minutes.
Yeah, we could even do a session tomorrow where I could do a tutorial and take you through it, and we'll do a little use case scenario. You want to organize some idea or some project or get something done, we could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Fun.
So we'll use the rest of the time we have tonight, maybe just to answer a few more of these questions. My short answer on the media and Hollywood question is make it an interactive experience for yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you do fall into a passive state. Television is definitely designed to be that. Even the most exciting and mind-blowing mystery. All you have to do is sit there, and David Caruso is going to solve it for you by the top of the hour.
I have one other tip now that I'm thinking about it. If you are concerned about psychological warfare and being under the influence of that while watching audio or video, I would take the steps to learn how they produce audio or video. Learning about how they put a movie together gives you a great deal of the ability to stand back and be like, well, I understand how they lit this scene, moved the camera through the scene. I understand so many details of how they showed me. I can instantly break down and unsuspend my disbelief. That's the key. When they have you suspending your disbelief and they're feeding you propaganda, that's bad. You should have your door shut during that interaction, right? And so that's when you unsuspend your disbelief and be like, that's just a movie. I don't need to see that violence or whatever. You can turn your head. You can treat these different situations. You have choice. They don't want you to know that. They want you in a theater where if they're showing something that you don't want to see, you might be embarrassed to turn your head or close your eyes or something like that. Or, if there's somebody being raped on just crazy shit that you don't necessarily need in your head any more times than you've seen it already.
Right.
So I'm just saying, like, that's a sign of a conscious person. If you see someone do that, you should probably go up to them afterwards and talk to them because you'll have an interesting conversation. It's like, oh, you were having trouble dealing with that content that is just violent, unnecessary, glory porn,
right?
War porn, that type of stuff. What do they call it? Violent porn. There's a catchphrase for it now. I forget what it is.
Gore porn sounds.
Gore porn that doesn't get into violence though. It's the violence. It's the sexualizing of violence, and you see it in films where the man and the woman might get in a fight or shoot at each other, like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and have a bunch of babies. Just saying.
Have you heard of ponerology?
Political ponerology is one of my favorite topics. It's
great.
How to identify psychopaths in your midst, especially politicians. Politics is like a great magnet that attracts, sociopaths, psychopaths. I think that we should use those magnets to attract those people and then, make sure that they're not controlling our lives. We don't have to do anything to them, right? We just need to cut off our voluntary association and funding and attention. Like, we're giving our attention to a bunch of companies that do not want us to have good lives. Disney, all these other companies, they're for your kids. No, they're not. Walt Disney was a Nazi. Look it up. It's true.
It's a hot political opinion right there. That's what we used to say.
I'm coining a phrase from Benny from Joy Camp. Benny and Kevin made that video. Princess Intervention is what you want to check out. Google that or YouTube that. Princess Intervention. You'll laugh and you'll learn.
So who is the author? Do you know?
Of Princess Intervention?
No,
Joy Camp.
Political ponerology.
Oh wait, Andrew Lobachowski is the answer to that question. Lobaczewski, maybe. Lobachewski?
Yeah.
Lobachewski.
All right, so I'm just
got any more quiz questions? I like it. Is there a prize? Is this like Jeopardy?
Some of these I kind of want to avoid.
All right. Well,
any thoughts? Well, I'll give you an example of one that I think we're.
I would
the problem
hate to think
is
somebody's watching this and they don't get their question read because it's something you want to avoid.
Right. So. I will read it, but right. I think that and it's nothing that I want to avoid. Like, I don't want to talk about it. It's just like it's we've got about 10 minutes because you have somewhere you got to.
I do. I have another obligation this evening, another meeting.
So. I'm sorry, everyone. The chat just jumps on me. So let me find.
But I will say that I spent time getting this all set up. So we had a chance at starting early, but then there was some other snafus outside the office that happened, like the need to eat something before we did this.
Yeah,
that wasn't planned for until late.
Here's an interesting one to end with because I think this might be something we could talk about for a few minutes. James asks for Richard. Having hosted a couple of debates over anarchy versus minarchy, namely Stefan Molyneux versus Tom Wilkins and Larkin Rose versus Tom Wilkins, on your show, where do you stand on that issue? Is the authority of the state legitimate?
That's such a loaded question. First off, I want to say about those debates, there were individuals in the Tragedy and Hope community who wanted to see those debates go on. And basically, once they had gotten like Stefan and Tom to agree to the debate, I was like, "Yeah, I'll host it. Let me know what day it is, and I'll go downstairs and we'll do the debate." So I really didn't have a lot of creative input on those, but I was looking forward to the chance to help facilitate and test out the studio and get that all going on. I have never seen any logical reasoning why the state would have special powers or. I don't see why the state exists. I think it's an egregore, Egrgore, egregore, which is it's a belief of something that's not true. It's a universal, not a particular. I don't see how these things could have rights, let alone rights that we don't have. And so I'm not a big fan of authority. So if you want to reread the question, I'll answer it directly.
Okay. Having hosted a couple of debates over anarchy,
I got that part. What's the last part?
Is the authority of the state legitimate?
Is the authority of the state legitimate? No. I don't think authority or state are legitimate, so I don't think combining those two things would add up to a legitimate thing.
I agree. We don't have much to debate there.
Yeah.
Well, do you remember what
were we supposed to debate? I could debate on it. I'll just take either side, whatever side you want.
Do you remember what Tom's position was? What the general thrust of his argument?
Well, Tom's concern, I think, is the ability to reliably, consistently, and with integrity prosecute individuals, because there have been a lot of problems with arbitration, mediation, these sort of third-party private institutions that don't have there would be no consistency across regions. If you got caught in Kentucky, they might have a very different trial system than what you might find in New York or Oregon. You know what I'm saying?
Or even from town to town or county.
Right. So even though that's slightly different all across the country, and even though the judicial system, as I've experienced it, is highly a racket, they do a very small percentage of good things, and the majority of what they do is there to fleece the public and to control people and dissidents and to prevent competition from catching up with the people that have these special rules. Like multinational corporations who don't have to pay taxes and this kind of thing. Like those entities do not exist, and yet they've been given more rights than human beings, and that is a problem. That bent any sort of fairness in our markets or free market way out. We can't have that with those types of things. And that's what Allen Dulles and these guys did for the Rockefellers pre-World War II with Germany. They went in and took their largest industries and said, hey, we're going to send you to war again, but we're going to make sure that these companies survive and are internationalized. And, that's other people playing with that's some people playing with another person's country or life and doing it with millions of those people at a time. Like, that's a grandiose ego to think, oh, let's just go change the future of Germany over there. And, but they did it. Those are the people that financed Hitler.
Right.
So, and enabled him to escape, all sorts of acts along the way, through law, international law.
Richard, when will you go on Jeopardy?
I don't think I'll ever be on Jeopardy.
You think you could do it? You think you'd do pretty well on there?
Yeah, but those questions are the questions that they choose on there are like trivial. There's not a whole lot of substance or meaning. Like, if you went through the trouble to learn all that stuff, why not just learn about like the world is relevant to you? And in other words, in order to do well and exceed on Jeopardy, you would have to learn a lot of trivial things that I really don't want to have to expose myself to, I guess.
You seem to have,
like, if they want to quiz me on Cecil Rhodes and they had some cool categories where I was like, yeah, let's talk about the psychology of control through history. I'll take 600 BCE, please, right?
Well, let me ask you this. Yeah. With all this research that you've done and you've been able to retain, from my point of view, an impressive amount of it that you can just Wes and Steph are three people that I can think of immediately who just have this recall power that I haven't learned yet. So
but you can learn it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you can too.
But this is the question. Do you, having gone through that mental exercise, do you feel like you would be able to recall more of these trivial facts that you've known and buried? Do you think that will have helped you improve?
I've always been good at a sort of game like Jeopardy.
Yeah.
So I'm just filled with more substantial facts now.
Yeah.
Like, I probably would have done better at Jeopardy 10 years ago before I learned all this other stuff. Because the stuff that I've learned, they're never going to ask on Jeopardy like you see it on TV.
Sure.
Although we might fashion some sort of game show. I had someone write this past week, and they were talking about fashioning a game show, and they gave me it was about fallacies, and it would be the first logic game on the internet, and it gave a clip of Glenn Greenwald and this guy Lawrence O'Donnell, and I hadn't watched it yet, but I listened to your podcast
That was
today
me.
with Wes Burt. No, you put in your podcast today, but I don't think it was you that sent me that email that said about like create a logic game, and he gave me that clip as an example of you could use this clip and then identify the straw man and these other fallacies.
Right.
And I hadn't gotten to it yet, but it was sitting in my inbox. And when I was outside today listening to the podcast you published today, I was like, how do you do this? Like you did this with Wes a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago.
Gardner.
Gardner.
Yeah.
Gardner Goldsmith.
Another guy you'd like to talk to.
That's the thing. I talk to people and I don't get to see them. So when I was listening to you guys today, that's why I couldn't match it up. I was like, wow, I didn't notice that Wes's voice was like this, but you were talking with Gardner Goldsmith.
Right.
See, that's what happens when you're doing something, listening to a podcast. Sometimes you miss little details, but they come full circle, and now I'm corrected. Thank you very much.
Right. So that looks like it wraps up our questions just in time.
And I got to embarrass myself before the episode by mixing up two very studious intellectuals who I like to get to know better, so I don't mix them up anymore.
One more person. I don't want to skip over anyone. This Kokesh question, I didn't see it when I was going through before.
Yeah,
can you just give me the Kokesh question again? I see Kokesh appearing several times. His name at the bottom of the chat here. So if somebody can just recap that for me.
We could guess what the question could be while they're doing that. I don't know. What do you think? I think he's being held without bond right now. It's just not the first time or even the second time he's been arrested in the past 6 months. I don't know Adam personally. I check out his work. I've seen some of his trips.
Yep.
And I can appreciate that he's been through a lot being in, he was a Marine.
Yes.
And then you discover what's going on. So that's like antithetical to what he, was fighting for. And he seems like a interesting, intelligent, hardworking, studious guy. And I don't know. The claim was that he had mushrooms or psilocybin in his house or whatever.
And he's talked about and he's talked about PTSD.
And
I don't know.
I don't know. Like, there's an argument to be had if he's being incarcerated because of that. If that's the real reason, like there's some good arguments out of that. Like Johns Hopkins is using psilocybin on cancer patients, end of life care to raise the quality of life. And they end up communicating with their families and stuff like that. If you look it up, there's a YouTube video where Dr. Charles Grob, Grob, does an interview. Where he talks about the use of psilocybin and end of life care for cancer patients.
Mm-hmm.
So Adam doesn't have to have cancer to be looking into that.
Absolutely. So the question,
but I would have to study more on the situation. I'm just
the question was, which I think we can answer: too soon or too late for the March idea and the shotgun vid that he made that was about 30 seconds.
Did he let people know about it too soon? Is that what you're saying?
Did he do this too soon, or is he already too late? And I mean, you can think about it for a minute.
That's a really good question.
I think that
I remember when he announced it, and I was like, "Whoa, that's pretty far out there." Like the establishment isn't going to probably sit for that. They're probably going to do something. And so, if he was set up, like that's totally foreseeable that that was one of the dominoes that could fall later. Especially after they picked him up in Philadelphia and, that sort of thing happened. But then I read that someone else made a comment that he was always getting arrested in parks, and it was always the parks police that was picking him up. Like, that was supposed to mean something. I was like, that doesn't mean anything to me. That's just a fact.
Right.
You connect it to another fact, maybe I'll get some meaning to it, but that's just a fact. And I don't even know that it is a fact because I didn't look for it myself. That's just something that was going around out there. So I think that the people that care about him, if I was a close friend of his, I'd be trying to figure all this stuff out. And then I'm sure it's probably out there on his site. If people care to look, you can figure out what the actual situation is.
One thing that Adam Kokesh does very well is that he introduces new ideas to people in a humorous context. He's made some very creative videos, and he's done some kind of on the street trolling type videos that are very enjoyable. Yeah. And you get people laughing, and you are the protagonist presenting these ideas, and you see that the other people don't have much to come back at you with, and that makes for a good presentation. Like Carlin said, the point to insert a new idea is at the point of laughter.
Right.
So Adam's
got to build that bridge of empathy before you can send over the 18-wheeler of logic.
Exactly. But I think a place that you should really never try to introduce new ideas to people is in a political context, because I think people implicitly understand politics as aggressive, right? So even even when
use
you're
of a
just,
label in the
Yeah.
first place, to label oneself is to negate your best aspects or to negate yourself entirely. So people who are talking politically, they've already assumed a label.
yeah,
Guess what? They're not changing that label today,
Right.
no matter what you say, because that label is their identity. They need to get their self-confidence, self-esteem, self-reliance back through learning before they can even think about releasing that pseudo identity that they've adopted as a Republican or Democrat or any of these other things. Like I'm not saying what I do is what you should do, but I don't find any benefit anymore in labeling myself in that way because I unlearned those loops of conditioning. Like my vote was never counting for president. I'm not in the electoral college. I never will be in the electoral college. So those are the only people who vote in this country, and they don't know you. They don't care about you. They're not checking to see what you want. And so the whole idea that we vote for president is kind of a scam in the first place.
absolutely. And you know what I'm saying
In more
is,
ways than one. I mean,
sure,
consider Larkin's work. I mean, it's a real scam.
yeah, it's kind of like I was thinking maybe you've seen parents in the park or you've known people who've done this, but they try to control children's behavior by making it into a game.
Oh, yeah.
I have an idea, everybody. Here's what we're going to do.
It's kind of better than a threat, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. It is better than the threat, but that's basically what politics and voting is in this country. It's like a game that adults made up to pacify children.
Politics runs mainly on neglected aspects.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yes.
And the fact that they're not held to what they say. So Obama can say things without neglected aspects, but then he's never going to do those things. Like you can play Obama 2007 and Obama today, and they're not the same guy.
So the point with Kokesh is that even trying to introduce new ideas to people within the context of politics is very dangerous, and it can be very explosive because people understand that there's an implicit threat in political language and discourse that I want my will imposed on you like this. So Adam kind of goes, I think, way too far. This is my opinion. And like I said before, everybody's hierarchy of values is different. So I see Adam Kokesh do things that I would never do, and I'm trying not to be judgmental, and I'm trying to understand. I mean, I've only ever talked to him a couple of times. I'm trying to understand why he does what he does.
I think it's because it provokes thought. I mean, he's almost like an activist artist. Because, loading the shotgun in D.C. meant nothing to the people. Like, he didn't even get arrested that day.
Right.
It meant something when he showed it to other people, when he was setting a bad example for the citizens. You know what I'm saying? It's
Right.
like, they can't, those agencies have reputations. They're like a laughing stock. It's like, oh, this ex-soldier came in on this day when he said he was going to come here and do this thing, and he did this thing, and you guys didn't stop him. Great. Now go plant some stuff and go arrest him, or whatever they said. Like at that point, it's not a logical conversation that's happening inside of those agencies. There's identities and emotions all mixed in, people's careers on the line, that sort of stuff. It's like, he became persona non grata, I'm sure. Like, but if he had an argument like, hey, those weren't real shotgun shells, so you can't really arrest me because you have no proof that those shells were loaded. Like, there's a couple intellectual self-defense methods. Like, if they put you in that situation and they're trying to use mental kung fu on you, wouldn't it be great to know how to stop their punches and punch back? And that's what I'm saying. Like, to prosecute him, what do they have to do? File a complaint using what? Words. If that person knows how to use words better than you, they could probably construct some words on a page and win. But if you start assailing their every declarative sentence and bringing out all the uncertainty and all the reasonable doubt that exists, and you bring to light patterns of tyranny that are like being focused against someone who's trying to stand up for his rights, and he's a soldier and he has every right to do whatever he did that was legal.
Yeah.
Right. Wasn't it the Heller case a couple years ago that said basically you could have a loaded rifle on the streets of DC and no one's tested that yet? Or was it Heller? Hellerstein's the judge in the 9/11 Silverstein case. Heller was the precedent, Supreme Court case precedent that allowed guns in DC.
So I'm interested to see, like, at this point, there's a lot of information I don't have, and I'm interested to see what Adam's contingency plan is, because, I mean, this looks like it was intended to be very provocative, and I don't know if Adam wanted to go down as hard as he did, but he definitely wanted there to be a stir over this.
I think the first time when he was in jail in Philadelphia, they saw that he was far too comfortable and non-threatened, and he's like, no, I can continue to do this for days. Yeah. Like, this is nothing. Right, like he's seen harder shit is basically what he was, indicating, and they're like, okay, well, we'll, keep you away from your friends and family for months and no bond, and they're just trying to break him down. They did the same thing to Ezra Pound. if you read the story of Ezra Pound, and he ends up in St. Elizabeth's Hospital in D.C. after they put him in a cage out in the sun in Italy for like 6 weeks, and that is now the Department of Homeland Security's new headquarters. So the psychiatric hospital, where he wasn't a Nobel Prize winner, but he had several proteges, people he taught that became Nobel Prize winners for literature. So here you have this brilliant literary mind. Not really a threat to the establishment unless the establishment's a bunch of liars and this guy is onto something, right?
Yeah.
I don't recall ever seeing any published evidence that Ezra Pound was mentally unfit or ill. And so you have these cases. They did the same thing to Lord Northcliffe, who owned the Times in London. Yeah. So he was part of the Round Table. So like there are powers that can take someone even on the Cecil Rhodes Round Table who's like a billionaire, who's like the William Randolph Hearst of his day, and take him right out of society.
That's interesting too. That was a pretty towing the line of the establishment newspaper, especially during World War I.
Sure.
So maybe it's a story for another time.
That's another episode.
Yeah. So anyway, well, I had 3 topics. We did one, and I'm totally satisfied. We've got plenty of time, guys. I'm going to actually be down here for a little while, so we'll do hopefully a lot more of these shows.
Brett's working on a book project. Shh, don't tell anybody.
It's possible. It's possible. And we might have a couple things in the works that we can't tell
I look forward to the
yet.
opportunity to just, do more stuff like this and some Tragedy and Hope Casual Cafe and these types of conversations to share not only like just tutorials and the stuff that we're talking about one tomorrow with the brain, or just showing you how we edit media or any of these things that you can start to, anything that helps to kindle your fire so you start, your imagination starts going, questions start going. That's all you need to go forward under your own power. But we're happy to help give you a little push.
Yeah, and you had a great line in the last show that we did where you said, you don't have to remember anything we talked about today. You just have to know that it's there. And you never know where that inspiration or that motivation is gonna come from, because the more that is presented to people, the more there's a chance of something that can get a hook into them. And we all go through periods. I've done it too. We go through periods where we get apathetic. It has definitely happened to me. Maybe for you it only lasts a couple hours. Maybe some people have never known anything else. But the more stuff that you can put out there, the better chance there is that somebody's going to be able to grab onto something. And this is something that's happened to me several times in my life, where I say, "Wow, that's really interesting. What else is there?"
It happens to me a couple times a day.
Yeah.
Not everyone is in front of as much information as me, but you have the opportunity at some point if you want to.
Yeah.
Reprioritize your time and your habits, and program yourself.
Absolutely.
Don't be programmed.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Well, thank you. I'm going to do the handshake. Look, we're that close, everybody.